We are living in a crazy video game era. There is so much out there. Subscription services for more gaming content that we could ever dream of, free-to-play games that keep giving more and more, $5 indie games that give us hundreds of hours of content, and yet, we are also getting closer to the peak era of retro gaming, emulation, and handheld devices. With the rise of the Steam Deck and the Rogue Ally, the successes of the Retro Pocket, Anbernic, Retro Mini, we can play any and every game released in the last 30 years. That sounds crazy until you realize that 30 years ago was only 1994. God, I'm getting old. And washed. Nonetheless, this has opened a new challenge I have for myself. To revisit games from the past and play the best games of every console and handheld released since way before I was born. I wanted to start with one of the most iconic devices in the world. Even our abuelitas know its name, the Game Boy. Starting from the top, the 15th best Game Boy game of all time is Final Fantasy Adventure. Final Fantasy Adventure was released by Square when Nintendo was still counting that money they had made releasing Final Fantasy, then Final Fantasy 2, then 3, and so on. Basically, they couldn't get enough of this new series and also couldn't get enough of this money. Final Fantasy Adventure was created by Koichi Ishii. He was one of the original developers of Final Fantasy and was given the green light to direct his own spin-off series. My man had a whole world in mind, the Mana series. But at the time, he wasn't allowed to stray too far from the Final Fantasy RPG formula. The game, though, blew up and sold more than 700,000 units worldwide. Final Fantasy Adventure starts off by letting you know you are essentially a gladiator, a slave, who fights monsters for the Dark Lord's entertainment. I wish I could tell you who the Dark Lord is, but I don't know if Nintendo can either. They didn't give him a name, just Dark Lord. Anyways, your best friend Willy tells you that you should stop the Dark Lord from doing Dark Lord things, and then he dies, unlucky. You use that raw emotional strength to escape the castle and find Bogard, a former Gemma Knight that will help you figure out a way to stop the Dark Lord. Of course, you meet almost immediately the key to all of this, the heroine of the story, which you name. I named her Katie for my wife. You then spend the rest of the game meeting NPCs, losing and rescuing Katie a number of times, doing puzzles and going through dungeons until you eventually conclude the story. Even though we have Final Fantasy in its name, the game does not play like an original Final Fantasy. It is much more similar to the original Legend of Zelda. It has all the action RPG elements from that era. You find different books that teach you magic, a ton of different weapons that will allow you to get past obstacles and keep expanding your map. You have a boss after each dungeon. You have a desert level, there's a swamp level. There is a chocobo though, so that does bring it back towards Final Fantasy. Another way they stayed in that RPG zone was with its progression system. You gain experience and level up your character and can choose which stat to prioritize out of 4. You can focus on your overall stamina, power, wisdom, or will. And that little bit of control over your character makes the game more personal and makes it feel like I'm in charge. Things feel good. The movement is fine, the puzzles can sometimes be challenging. I will be completely honest and tell you that I had to look up a couple of things to get past an obstacle or two. The weapons are all very different and the spells you use are varied too. They did a good job at giving you a different toy to play with to keep you engaged. The same techniques that every single game uses to this day. So everything is all good with the game, right? Well, the menu is a complete nightmare. I still wake up at night thinking about how much of a struggle it is to change my equipment around, choose a different spell and use it, choose an item and use it, go back to a different weapon. Listen, I know the limitations of making an action RPG with 4 buttons is difficult, but damn. Can we talk about the music though? It is absolutely banger. The composer, Kenji Ito, is a genius and he cooked with the game's OST. If you end up not playing this game, at least play the original soundtrack while you are working or studying or whatever it is you guys do in your free time, if not watching, liking, and subscribing to my videos. The art direction has to be applauded too. The overworld looks great and it transmits exactly what they wanted. On the opposite end of the spectrum, the dungeon design leaves a little bit to be desired. It seems like they decided to make the overworld pretty and rich and the dungeons just simple and kind of boring. Now, to answer the question in everyone's mind, does this guy have an accent or is he having a stroke? The answer is, I have an accent and hopefully not having a stroke. But to answer the other question, we will use my trusty worth it gauge. I have placed the arrow slightly on the not worth it side, but hear me out before you go crazy on me in the comments. I have 3 reasons why this is the case. Reason number 1. This isn't the definitive version of the game. The GBA remake Adventure of Mana is a better representation of the original vision of the developer, so it's best to play that game if you want to delve into the Mana series. Number 2. If you want to play a top-down action RPG from that era, the best game to play is The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past for the SNES or its Game Boy Advance remake. Number 3. Because even though I like the game, I'm not sure I would categorize it as a must-play for the Game Boy. Finally, is this game better than Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3? No. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you can be ready to see my next best Game Boy games review. Gracias y adiós.